The public figures that present arguments made with the intention of gaining awareness to the issue of surveillance and privacy often fall short of this goal. The people that make this argument frequently dive into overly technical or alarmist rants and lose their audience in the process. If you sound too technical, no one will know what you're talking about. Too alarmist, and no one will care what you're talking about. The result of this failure to communicate the threat of surveillance is observable in our reactions, or rather indifference, to the consistently invasive measures used by the private and public sector of our economy. In the wake of the 2013 NSA leaks and 2016 Cambridge Analytica scandal, you would think that the public's opinion on any measure of surveillance would be set in stone. We had evidence of our government violating our constitutional rights. We had evidence of a social media company using our data to sway political movements. Why would we ever welcome more surveillance? Yet here we are in 2020 and everyone still walks around with a device that's always monitoring them, a device for which we will willingly shell out hundreds of dollars for, and sign a contract that gives the corporation who made the device access to everything the device has access to. A corporation who is always ready to share your information with the government, given that you fit the increasingly arbitrary definition of a terrorist. But you might be thinking to yourself, if all of these things are so bad, why have I, as an individual, not been negatively affected by them? And you would have a solid point. After all, you're not a terrorist or a criminal, and there are strict laws regarding how corporations can use your personal information. You also might be thinking, isn't government surveillance necessary for our safety? It helps thwart terrorism, stop human trafficking, along with being a deterrent for violent crime. And isn't corporate surveillance necessary for our convenience? It helps Google provide relevant map data. It's what powers the YouTube recommendation algorithm, and even allows us to find our lost iPhones. And it's in failing to address these supposed benefits that most privacy advocates lose their audience by alluding to the potential for an Orwellian future. Orwell could not have imagined how much his book would be used to justify the irrationality of paranoid individuals. He also would not believe how his idea of the telescreen would eventually manifest itself into devices the size of our palms, in which many of us are addicted to. However, for an example in which the fears of the privacy enthusiasts are validated, we need to look no further than the country of China. Within the past decade, China has effectively implemented a technology-backed surveillance state. It is believed that China has about one surveillance camera for every 4 people, which ironically is the same ratio as it is in America. The major difference between China and the US is that China has no laws stopping the state from doing nefarious things with their surveillance program. The citizens of China have no freedom of speech to dissent from what's happening, no guarantee of a trial by jury, and no right to bear arms to resolve issues with the state that couldn't be settled through otherwise diplomatic means. But the US does, and for that reason I disagree with the notion that we would ever devolve into a totalitarian surveillance state before destroying ourselves in a major civil conflict. This does not mean that the negative effects of surveillance haven't already taken a toll on the American way of life. In a strange way, the 2013 NSA leaks are both the catalyst for these negative effects and a massive step towards preventing them from getting worse.
What authorized investigation gave you the grounds for acquiring my cell phone data?
Edward Snowden was the stern-faced doctor telling our country it had cancer, and this cancer came in the form of power-hungry government officials during the months preceding the chaos of 9/11. They pushed for sweeping legislation that gave intelligence agencies the flexibility to crack a few unconstitutional eggs to make a terrorist omelet. Measures in this sweeping legislation, such as the Patriot Act, included provisions that allowed the government to search citizens' possessions, including your search history, without a warrant. Many argue this is a major violation of the Fourth Amendment against unreasonable searches and seizures. So in a tale as old as history, our leaders took advantage of a crisis as a way to further their agenda, while simultaneously telling us that it was for our own protection. The hypothetical abuse of these laws was mostly conjecture, and would have remained so until the Snowden leaks provided evidence of a mass surveillance program known as PRISM. This program requires corporations such as Verizon, Microsoft, Google, Apple, and Facebook to provide a backdoor to their users' data for the NSA and any other curious 3-letter agencies. Had we gone without learning of this, there would be no public backlash to these practices and no limit to the power of those who were behind it. Even if the program began with intentions to serve the American people, we can never know the motivations of the person in charge 3 decades down the line. We would have found out about PRISM in the same way the Chinese citizens found out about their social credit system. But why am I so confident in the capability for a governing agency to become so corrupt that they would attempt to supersede the democratic process to get their way? Well, I have historical precedents on my side and a realistic view of human nature. But more conclusive evidence can be found in French philosophers Michel Foucault's theory of Panopticism. Foucault's theory suggests that surveillance leads to a society that is willing to sacrifice individuality for order and hierarchy. This trade-off usually comes during a time of crisis, and he uses an example that has an uncanny similarity to our current situation, the 17th century plague in Europe. He describes the process of quarantine, segmentation, and spatial partitioning of the population as a political dream. Due to the rare circumstances of the plague, measures were taken to intensely document everything, and the quarantined people lost all expectation of privacy. Foucault suggests that the ruling class, after observing how effective these measures were at controlling people, concluded that the use of surveillance was a more effective and civil way to keep order in a society, rather than the random displays of violence that were the norm before. This set into motion our modern interpretation of the prison and judicial system. Foucault then goes to describe a prison designed in the 18th century known as the Panopticon, which he alludes to as the physical embodiment of his idea of Panopticism. It's a circular building with a single tower in the center and cells surrounding it. The prisoners cannot see into the guard tower, but the guard tower can see into the prisoner's cell. The unverifiable nature of the guard in the guard tower creates a psychological prison for the inmate, in which he is compelled to follow the rules of the prison. Because he is never sure of when he can break the rules secretly, he does not break the rules. Foucault's idea of panopticism, while being effective in reducing crime and violence in a society, is the perfect storm for a would-be tyrant that manages to creep his way into the metaphorical guard tower. Our country was founded on principles that require a balance of power, competing ideologies, compromise, and independent thought. The practice of total surveillance, even if no action is taken by the surveyor, impedes these founding principles and presents an existential threat to our democracy. The very thought that you could be monitored is what makes you police the words you type into your browser or speak out loud. By robbing individuals of the ways to exercise thoughts in their head, you, the man in the tower, can effectively kill ideas that present a threat to you. I see Foucault's theory of panopticism not as history repeating itself, but rather a natural progression of societal control structures adapting to the gig economy. The chaos and freedom brought on by the rise of the internet and social media came about because the power structures that existed in the 20th century did not occupy the unsettled land. The business models and dictatorships that failed to adapt to this new realm were left in the dust or toppled in dramatic fashion. However, now that the golden days of the internet are behind us and the land has been settled, the question that remains is, did the principles that founded our country make it to the other side?
But we must do more to ensure that the benefits of the information revolution flow to every American. We must also pay attention to the issues of computer security and the privacy of our records on computers, so that the newest technology doesn't undermine our oldest values. I'll see you online at whitehouse.gov, and thanks for logging on.